So how did Qatar become the go-to negotiator between Hamas and Israel? Hamas, which is mostly in Gaza, and Israel fought for over 50 days from just miles apart. And then Qatar, from all the way over here, came along and brokered truce deals between the two warring parties. But how? So the short answer some people would think as to how Qatar became the problem solver in all of this is that some of Hamas's political leadership lives in Doha, Qatar's capital city. But it's not quite that simple. Firstly, let's start off with why a mediator is even needed between Hamas and Israel. Hamas, which was established in 1987, does not recognize Israel, as it's the occupying state of historic Palestinian lands. And Israel see Hamas as a terrorist organization and want to eradicate or destroy it by any means necessary. Therefore, the two parties do not communicate directly, and it's worth mentioning at this point that Hamas has two wings, the Izz al-Din al-Qassam brigades, which are based in Gaza, and the Political Bureau, which is based in Doha. But Hamas in its entirety is seen as, or officially prescribed as, a terrorist organization in many countries around the world, including the UK, US, and parts of the EU. But some countries, such as Qatar, do not view it as just that simple. And that's partly why Qatar, since 2012, has been able to host the political wing of Hamas. But hosting them actually came about at the request of some US officials who wanted to establish a communication channel. Over the years, many have criticized Qatar for hosting any Hamas leadership, but during this war on Gaza, it's been labeled as a controversial benefit to house Hamas's political leadership. Qatar therefore has positioned itself as able to talk to both state and non-state actors, that some Western countries are perhaps not willing to engage with directly. This, of course, not being the first time a dynamic like this has made Qatar a hub for negotiations, diplomacy, and dialogue. Recently, Qatar acted as an interlocutor between the Taliban and the West after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, and Qatar has a history of other successful negotiations. But why not other countries in the region to mediate between Hamas and Israel? Well, let's talk about Egypt first, Gaza's neighbor, which used to be the main mediator between Hamas and Israel. But the relationship soured between Egypt's military and Hamas due to Hamas's close ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. And also, according to some reports, the US prefers dealing with Qatar over Egypt as a mediator, as Egypt hasn't really delivered so far on the Palestinian issue. Although Egypt was the lead negotiator between both sides in 2014 and again in 2021. But the Biden administration seems to prefer working with Qatar more closely. But Qatar, the UAE, Egypt, and even Turkey have all tussled over the role of mediator between Hamas and Israel, as a way of strengthening their ties with the US. And remember, you also have the Palestinian Authority, which doesn't really have much influence when it comes to Hamas. So of course, keeping in mind that Hamas is outlawed in many countries around the world, the leadership's options for countries to reside in have been quite limited, as very big risks come with hosting them. Other options could have been Syria, Iran, or even Russia, but countries like those would have made communicating or negotiating with Hamas in a time like this potentially even more difficult. Although Qatar's position on Palestine is clear, no normalization with Israel unless it commits to a two-state solution, Doha has still proven itself as a pragmatic mediator. Dr. Andreas Craig recently wrote, Qatar also became the first country in the world to send a high-level delegation to Gaza as soon as the temporary pause or truce was negotiated. So Qatar's access to both warring parties becomes one of the major factors, but not the only factor for Qatar to be positioned where it is diplomatically. Qatari officials say they are guided by a desire to reduce conflict, and political actors who once criticized Qatar have appreciated its unique role in this conflict. Ultimately, Qatari mediators, along with the US and Egypt, faced the task of getting the warring sides to put faith in diplomacy when trust was sub-zero.